Hello everyone, Chris here, and in this Unity video, we're going to be covering text elements, and that includes both UI text, which we've already covered a little bit, but also text meshes, which are more of a physical 3D game object that you can actually represent text with in the physical game world. So first off, the UI text, we've already talked a little bit about that. Whenever you have the text script, it's going to be attached to a game object that's on the UI canvas. And that means that it's going to be rendering as part of the HUD over your game. Wherever the camera looks at, this canvas is still going to be layered on top of that, at least by default. So like most, if not all elements on the canvas, it has a rect transform, which allows you to set anchor points, pivot points, and also the position of the text with reference to the canvas itself. So if you wanted the text to appear at the bottom of your canvas, you would want to hold Alt down to set the position. And you can see when you're holding these different shortcut keys, it shows you basically where it's going to be located. So if I hold Alt down, the box, basically representing this rect transform itself, is going to move to the bottom of the screen. Without having Alt selected, it would only set the anchor point, which you can see is that little dot right there in each of these corners. And you can think of the anchor point as the point for which all of these measurements, like position Y, and if we weren't having a stretch, also position X and position Z, would be referencing as its base point. So at the bottom of the screen, 0, 0, 0, that's where that's going to be. But as soon as you put bottom of the screen and then 300 pixels above that, well, that means 300 pixels above the anchor point. So if we want to set the position and the anchor point at the same time, we would hold Alt down on anchor presets, and then it would put it right down there at the bottom. If we switch back to the scene tab, we can get a little bit more detail about this text element. So you can see it's got a height of 45, and the reason it's not exactly at the bottom, despite the anchor point being set to exactly the bottom, is because we have our alignment centered vertically, vertical centering over here on the right, horizontal centering over here on the left, which is about the same as what you would expect out of a Word editor, Microsoft Word, LibreOffice, that kind of thing. Except instead, we're just setting the text position within this single rect transform rather than a Word document. But much in the same way, we can set the alignment. So if you want it to be over on the left of the box, you would simply left align. You can do right align. But in many cases, I probably would just go with centering. Vertical align, same kind of deal, just rather than left and right, it's up and down. Now, after we changed the settings on the anchor point, we eliminated the stretch while we were setting that. So you can see now it's got a width that's equal to the width of the canvas, but if I was to expand the canvas, you can see, hey, it's no longer equal to the same width. So if you wanted to, once again, stretch it, you would want to click over here to make it stretch horizontally. You can see also in the bottom left-hand corner, you can stretch vertically. And if you want to stretch in all directions to basically make the rect transform equal to the canvas size or equal to its parent size, in the case that you have nested game objects here, you can have it stretch both directions here. So of course, if you want to change the text, you would do that in this text box over here. Also, if you are trying to change it in script, then what you would do is you would try to get this game object, and then you would target this text element specifically. And you can see, because it's just a bunch of characters, that the text is represented by a string. If you've ever programmed, that would have been pretty obvious. You can set the font choice by clicking over here on this little dot on the right, where you can select any font in your assets directory. So for instance, if I wanted to change that font to Arial, it wouldn't be hard at all. I would just click right there. And you have a few other very standard font settings, like being able to bold and italicize it, setting the font size, and how much space there should be between lines. So if I was to expand this box a bit, we can increase the line spacing, which, as you can see, is just going to add extra lines every time we have one line inside of this text. Like many different graphical elements inside of Unity, you have a color selector here. You can use the color drop tool if you want to select from a very specific area inside of your document. You can use the color picker to get a specific color from your scene. So like many graphical elements inside of Unity, the text also allows you to set the color. So with this color selection wheel, you can put in pretty much any HTML color you would imagine. ranging from all the different colors and all the different shades and hues, as well as controlling the alpha. So the alpha, if you don't know already, that's transparency. So if you want to hide something entirely, you can set it to 0 alpha. And if you want to make it visible again, set it to 255 alpha. And just quickly to touch on one of the most important components of the text script over here, best fit. So I'll go ahead and check this right now. And what you'll see is that the text expands basically to fit this box as best as it can, hence being called best fit. And the parameters here are minimum size and maximum size, basically, setting the upper and lower limits on what size this text can resize to. And if I change that, it might go up a bit more, but obviously if the box can't support the size like 80, it's going to stop at the highest size that can fit inside this box. Likewise, if you set a minimum size, it's going to try to shrink as far down as it can until it hits the minimum size. But if your box shrinks further than, like, say, minimum size 20 here, it's going to maintain that size even if that means some of your text may overflow or be truncated. Okay, now let's go ahead and move on to the other kind of text, which is a text mesh. So you can create a text mesh like most other game objects by right-clicking on either your scene or the hierarchy 3D object. And instead of a cube or a plane or other stuff like that, we'll go ahead and put in 3D text here. With text meshes, you're going to notice a couple things about it. Of course, it has the same anchoring and alignment that the UI text elements have, but we can also turn off 2D in order to see how it can float inside a 3D space, and it can move completely separately from the canvas itself. So if you wanted text to be floating above a character's head, you could do that. And it looks fine when you're zoomed out, which makes it maybe more ideal for 3D games or that kind of thing. But if you zoom in, you'll notice that with these text meshes, a lot of the fonts are going to look pretty blurry when zoomed up close. The reason for that is that any text font that's imported into Unity by default, the font texture is going to be set to bilinear filtering mode. And just like with the sprite textures, if you're doing pixel art, you probably want it set to point so that it doesn't have any of that anti-aliasing effect. So one way we can change this without resorting to scripts is to go up to each of the fonts we actually import into the project. Go to the top right-hand corner of the inspector and click on the gear and then hit create editable copy. So that will create a copy of basically this Hannah font here. We might want to call it Hannah Point Filtering or something like that. Hold on here. Point. Then I'll go ahead and rename all three of the components here, the texture and the material as well. But the one we actually need to change is right over here where it will say Hannah Point. It's imported as a sprite image, but that is the font texture itself. So here we can change the filter mode from bilinear to point, hit apply, and now if we take our text mesh and we set that to the alternative font here, the Hannah Point. So now it looks a lot better when we're zoomed in up close since we're using point filtering. And that's all well and good. So there's no more blur. But as we zoom out further and further and further, you'll notice that it has its own set of problems here. Because there's no bilinear filtering, when we zoom out to extreme distances, it loses all of its readability entirely. Yeah, that's one solution if you're going to have a static sized game or you know what sizes you're going to be scaling the font up to in every case. Alternatively, if you're going to be making your game with high screen resolutions, like many modern games, then the bilinear filtering by default may work just fine without having to mess around with point filtering. Of course, picking up the Pixel Perfect Dynamic Text package would be a more complete solution here, I think. I haven't personally tried it out, but it looks pretty solid. It's got a lot of reviews, and that may be a solid solution for you guys. Aside from that, it's mostly a matter of playing around with the size of the game objects transform, the size of the font, the spacing, and the anchoring and alignment down there until you get it looking how you want it to look. And just like with the UI text element, you can also change its color. So that's going to wrap up two types of text within Unity, including the UI text down here and the text mesh up there using point filtering to get that pixel art style look. I've been Chris. Thanks for watching. I hope you found this video helpful, and I'll see you guys in my future video content.